Ada Adama was hiding under a steel prep table when the first gunshot cracked through the restaurant. Plates were still falling from a waiter's tray, shattering against marble, and somewhere above her a man screamed in Korean, then went quiet. Ada pressed her back against the cold table leg, her uniform soaked from a tray of soup she had dropped 2 minutes earlier, and she thought very calmly that this was not how she imagined her first month in Seoul would end. Boots moved across the floor, slow, unhurried, like whoever was walking didn't need to rush, because everyone else in the room had already decided to be afraid of him. A hand reached under the table and pulled her out by the wrist. Ada looked up into the face of Han Joon-ho, heir to a name people in this city said only in whispers, and the first thing he said to her was not, "Are you hurt?" or "What is your name?" He looked at the soup stain on her uniform and said, "You smell like seafood." That was the moment everything changed for Ada Adama, though she didn't know it yet. To understand how a girl who once sold sachet water on the streets of Lagos ended up crouched under a table in a Gangnam restaurant owned by one of the most dangerous families in Korea, we have to go back. Back to where Ada had nothing. No connections, no money, no plan, just a suitcase, a visa that was about to expire, and a stubbornness that refused to let her go home empty-handed. Ada grew up in a small compound in Lagos with a mother who sold fabric at the market and a father who left before Ada could remember his face. She was the kind of child who read foreign magazines under streetlight because her house had no steady power, and somewhere in those pages she fell in love with Korea. Not the Korea of skyscrapers and idols, but the Korea of stories, where ordinary girls became extraordinary because they refused to stay small. She saved for 6 years, sold rice, braided hair, tutored children twice her size in English. When she finally landed in Incheon with $2,000 and a scholarship that barely covered tuition, she told herself she would not return to Lagos, a failure. But Seoul did not care about her plans. Within 4 months, her scholarship stipend was delayed, her rent was due, and the only job she could find was washing dishes in the back of a glamorous restaurant called Hanak Noir, a place so expensive that one bowl of soup cost more than Ada's weekly food budget. She took the job anyway, because pride does not pay rent. The restaurant, as Ada would later learn, was not just a restaurant. It was where the Han family conducted business that had nothing to do with food. On the night everything started, Ada was not even supposed to be on the floor. She was supposed to stay in the kitchen, invisible, the way the manager liked his foreign staff. But a senior waiter twisted his ankle, and someone had to bring the seafood platter to the private room upstairs. And Ada, eager to prove she could do more than wash plates, volunteered. She did not know that the private room belonged to Han Joon-ho. She did not know that the four men standing near the window were not business partners, but a rival family who had come to deliver a message with bullets instead of words. She walked in holding a tray of king crab just as the first gun came out. What happened next, Ada would replay in her mind for weeks. The tray left her hands, the crab legs scattered across imported marble. A man grabbed her arm to use her as a shield, and before she could even scream, Joon-ho moved. He didn't shout. He didn't flinch. He simply stepped forward, disarmed the man holding her with a calm that should have been terrifying, and said one sentence in Korean that made the entire room go still. Ada didn't understand the words, but she understood the silence that followed them. When the gunfire started for real, he pulled her under the table himself. So when he finally pulled her back out and said she smelled like seafood, Ada's brain did something unexpected. Instead of fear, instead of relief, instead of gratitude, she got angry. "You almost got me killed, and that is what you have to say to me." Joon-ho actually paused at that. Not because he was offended, but because no one in his life had spoken to him like that in years. Everyone around him was careful, polite, afraid. This girl covered in soup was glaring at him like he owed her an apology and a dry cleaning bill. "You're welcome," he said. "I didn't thank you." "You're going to." Ada wanted to slap him. She settled for walking away, which was difficult because her legs were shaking and her uniform was ruined, and she still had a job to lose if anyone found out she'd been upstairs. She thought that was the end of it. One strange, violent night, one rude, rich man, a story to tell no one, because no one would believe her anyway. She was wrong. The next morning, the restaurant manager called her into his office, and Ada was certain she was about to be fired. Instead, he told her something that made her stomach drop. Han Joon-ho had personally requested that she be moved from the kitchen to work directly under his family's account, handling private dining for his table whenever he came in. "Why me?" Ada asked. "I dropped his food. There was almost a war in that room." The manager looked at her like she was asking why water was wet. When young Master Han requests something, nobody asks why. You should be thanking your ancestors. Ada did not feel like thanking anyone. She felt like she had just been handed a leash with a very expensive collar. For the first week, she tried to be invisible again. She served Joon-ho's table with her eyes down, her words short, her presence as forgettable as possible. It did not work because Joon-ho seemed determined to make conversation out of nothing. "You're still angry," he said one evening, swirling a glass of something Ada couldn't afford to look directly at. "I'm working." "You're angry while working. That's different. I almost died in your restaurant. My family's restaurant. And you didn't die. You're very alive. Loudly alive." Ada set his plate down harder than necessary. "Is there anything else, sir?" "Don't call me sir. It makes me feel like your boss." "You are my boss. Then call me Joon-ho." "I will call you Trouble, because that is what you are." For the first time since she'd met him, Joon-ho laughed. Not the polite laugh he gave investors, but a real one, short and surprised, like it had escaped before he could stop it. Across the room, two of his bodyguards exchanged a look that said clearly they had never heard that sound before. This became their rhythm. Ada serving him with barely hidden irritation, Joon-ho provoking her on purpose because, as he admitted much later, watching her get annoyed was the only thing in his week that felt honest. Everyone else flattered him. Ada argued with him about portion sizes. It would have stayed that way, a strange workplace tension simmering quietly, if not for what happened on a Friday night 3 weeks later, when Ada's life in Seoul nearly ended for a completely different reason. She was walking home late after a double shift, cutting through a quiet alley to save 20 minutes, when two men stepped out of the shadows. They weren't random. They knew her schedule. They knew her name. And the first thing one of them said made her blood freeze. "Han Joon-ho's new pet. Let's see if he comes running." Ada didn't wait to find out what they wanted. She ran, but the alley was narrow and her legs were tired from 8 hours on her feet, and within seconds a hand closed around her arm. She did the only thing she could think of. She bit down hard on the wrist holding her and screamed loud enough to wake the whole street. It wasn't Joon-ho who came running. It was Ada's neighbor, an elderly Korean woman named Halmini Soo, who lived 2 doors down and had grown fond of the loud foreign girl who always greeted her with a deep bow in broken Korean. Halmini Soo came out swinging a broom like it was a sword, screaming for help, and the commotion was enough to scare the men off before anything worse happened. Ada sat on the curb afterward, shaking, while Halmoni Soo made tea and muttered about young people and their dangerous lives. It was only later, replaying the attacker's words, that Ada understood. This wasn't random. Someone wanted to send Joon-ho a message, and they were using her to do it. She should have been furious. Instead, lying awake that night, she realized the most frightening part wasn't the alley. It was that her first instinct, the moment she felt that hand on her arm, had been to think of Joon-ho's name like a prayer. When she told him what happened the next day, his reaction surprised her. He didn't apologize. He didn't promise empty comfort. His jaw simply tightened, and he asked one question. "Did they touch your face?" "What kind of question is that?" "Answer it." "No, why does that matter?" "Because if they touched your face, I would have needed 3 more men tonight instead of 2. Ada stared at him. "You're not even joking right now, are you?" "I rarely joke about violence. I joke about seafood." Despite everything, Ada laughed. A real surprise laugh, the kind that escapes before you remember you're supposed to be afraid. And in that small, sharp city, surrounded by glass towers and men who killed quietly behind closed doors, that laugh became the first thread of something neither of them had planned. From that day, Joon-ho assigned 2 of his men to watch Ada's street, though he never called it protection. He called it logistics. Ada pretended not to notice the black car that idled near her building every night. She also pretended not to notice that she started looking forward to his visits at the restaurant, counting down to the hour his car would pull up outside. Their conversations grew longer. Ada told him about Lagos, about her mother's fabric stall, about the 6 years she spent saving every coin to get here. Joon-ho, a man who had never told a living soul about his childhood, found himself telling her about a father who measured love in business contracts and a mother who left before he turned 10. You're the first person who's argued with me about portion sizes and also asked about my mother, he said one night. Maybe that's because everyone else is scared of you. Are you scared of me? Ada considered the question honestly. I'm scared of what you represent. I'm not scared of you. What's the difference? You laugh at my jokes. Bad men don't laugh easily. I'm still a bad man, Ada. Then be a bad man who learns to use a napkin properly because you eat like you've never seen one in your life. It was a small, ridiculous argument about table manners, and yet it was in that argument, watching him actually try to fold a napkin correctly just to prove her wrong, that Ada felt something in her chest shift permanently. The first time he kissed her, it wasn't planned, and it wasn't smooth like the dramas Ada used to watch back home. It happened in the restaurant's private courtyard, late at night, after a tense business dinner where Joon-ho had to smile at men he clearly despised. Ada brought him tea afterward, the way she always did, and found him sitting alone, tie loosened, looking unusually tired. Long night? She asked, setting the cup down. Jinja annoying, he muttered, the Korean slipping out before he caught himself. Truly annoying. You know I'm learning Korean. I understood that one. Good. Then you understand my whole life right now. Ada sat across from him, against every rule the manager had given her about staff not socializing with clients. You know, in my country, when someone looks this tired, we say their spirit is heavy. My spirit has been heavy since I was 10. Then let it rest for 5 minutes. I won't tell anyone. He looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look that made the courtyard feel smaller than it was, and said quietly, Sarangi. I love you, Ada blinked. That's a big word to throw out over tea. I've been holding it for 3 weeks. I'm tired of holding things. She should have laughed it off. She should have reminded him she was staff. He was practically royalty in this city's underworld, and nothing about this made sense. Instead, she leaned forward and kissed him first because Ada Adama had spent her whole life waiting for permission to want something, and she had decided, somewhere in that courtyard, that she was done waiting. Word travels fast in a city built on gossip disguised as business news. Within a month, photos surfaced online. A black foreign waitress, seen leaving Hanak Noir in Han Joon-ho's private car, more than once. Korean entertainment blogs picked it up immediately. Headlines speculated wildly. Some called her a gold digger. Others, surprisingly, called her refreshing, a breath of difference in a social scene that rarely saw outside the same 5 families marrying each other for decades. Ada became, almost overnight, the most talked about woman in Seoul. It should have felt like the grace she'd dreamed of back in Lagos, reading those magazines under streetlight. Instead, it felt like standing in the middle of a market with everyone staring. Except this market had millions of people in it, and half of them had opinions about whether she deserved to be there. Joon-ho's family was, predictably, the least amused. His grandmother, the true power behind the Han name, summoned Ada to the family estate with the warmth of a winter morning. The old woman studied her for a long, silent minute before speaking. You are foreign. Yes, ma'am. You work in a restaurant. I did, ma'am. Before that, I sold rice and braided hair to survive. And you think this qualifies you to stand beside my grandson? Ada's hands trembled, but her voice didn't. With respect, ma'am, I didn't ask to qualify for him. He chose to stand beside me. If you have a problem, that conversation belongs to him, not me. The room went silent enough to hear the air conditioning hum. One of the family aides actually stepped back, as if expecting lightning. Joon-ho's grandmother stared at Ada for what felt like an hour, then unexpectedly smiled. I goo. He finally found someone with a spine. A small sigh of disbelief. Everyone around this family bows. You argue. I'm sorry if that's disrespectful. It's not disrespectful. It's rare. The old woman waved a hand. Sit, eat. If you're going to survive this family, you'll need the strength. That moment, small as it seemed, would matter more than Ada realized, because 3 days later, the family that had sent men to attack her in that alley made their next move. And this time, they didn't bother hiding behind shadows. They went after the restaurant directly during business hours, demanding territory and money in front of paying customers. Joon-ho was out of the city when it happened, and Ada, against every instinct of self-preservation, refused to hide in the back. She stood at the host stand in front of 3 armed men and did something nobody expected. She called Halmoni Sue. Within 15 minutes, half the elderly women on Ada's street arrived, brooms and walking sticks in hand, blocking the restaurant's entrance and shouting loud enough to draw a small crowd and several phone cameras. Nothing humiliates an underworld enforcer faster than being filmed getting yelled at by a 70-year-old woman threatening to hit him with a broom for disturbing decent people's dinner. The men retreated not out of fear of violence, but out of fear of becoming a viral video. When Joon-ho returned and heard what happened, he didn't know whether to be furious or impressed. "You called a group of grandmothers to fight my battle. I called reinforcements. You should be grateful. They had brooms, Ada, and your enemies had guns and still ran. Don't underestimate Korean grandmothers. Where I come from, we'd call that strategy." He pulled her into a hug right there in the restaurant, in front of staff, in front of cameras still lingering outside, and said softly, "You're going to be the death of me." "No," Ada said against his chest. "I'm going to be the reason you survive." That video of grandmothers defending a foreign waitress turned Mafia Heir's girlfriend did more for Ada's public image than any press statement could. The narrative shifted overnight. She wasn't just a foreign gold digger anymore. She was the girl tough enough to call grandmothers into battle and brave enough to stand her ground in front of an entire crime family. The final test came when the rival family, desperate and humiliated, tried one last move, leaking a fabricated story claiming Ada had been planted by an outside organization to infiltrate the Han family. It was a clever lie designed to turn Joon-ho's own family against her. Ada didn't panic. She didn't hide. She sat down, recorded a simple video in her imperfect but improving Korean, and told her real story. Lagos, the fabric stall, the 6 years of saving, the dishwashing job. No script, no polish, just truth. The video did not go viral because it was scandalous. It went viral because it was honest, and honesty, in a city drowning in curated perfection, hit differently. Joon-ho's grandmother watched it twice. Afterwards, she gathered the family and said only one sentence that ended the matter completely. "A girl who survived what she survived does not need to lie about anything. Anyone who says otherwise can leave my house." The rival family, exposed and embarrassed, quietly backed down for good. Months later, Ada stood in that same private courtyard where Joon-ho first told her he loved her, except this time the courtyard was filled with flowers, and Halmoni Sue sat in the front row next to Joon-ho's grandmother, the two of them already arguing cheerfully about whose tea recipe was better. Ada's mother, flown in from Lagos for the first time in her life, stood beside her daughter in a dress made from the very fabric she used to sell at her stall. Joon-ho waited at the end of the aisle, looking far less composed than the calm, dangerous man who once pulled Ada out from under a table. "You're shaking," Ada whispered when she reached him. "I told you, you'll be the death of me. Good thing I came to keep you alive then." From a street kid selling sachet water under unreliable streetlight to the most talked-about woman in Seoul, Ada Adama's story proves something simple. Grace doesn't always arrive quietly. Sometimes it arrives in chaos, in gunfire, in soup stains, in grandmothers with brooms, and in a love nobody planned for, but everyone eventually respected. If this story moves something in you, don't scroll past it quietly. Tell me in the comments which moment hit you hardest: the alley, the courtyard, or the grandmother's rescue. Subscribe so you don't miss the next Afro-Korean love story waiting for you, and stay till the end, because what happens between Ada and Joon-ho's family is far from over.